And welcome. So this is part one of Contribute to Cybersecurity Risk Management. This is a new course unit for us in 2022, and as you can see, we've done this under license with RTO Works. They've presentation pack, and this is topic one. So what we'll do is get stuck into it. And what we'll be basically talking about in this series of slides will be the lovely risk management strategies for cybersecurity. Now, this will be an introduction. It won't cover all the ins and outs of the material that we need, but certainly will get you going along the lines. So, risk management is about protecting your assets. Now, these assets can be loss of data, theft or corruption of that data. You look at all of your systems as a whole. This includes your applications, security, amount of time that you lose, and compliance. Now, where are your threats going to come from? They're going to be internal and external threats, and we'll talk about what those threats are here. So the typical types will be your malware, your denial of service, your phishing attacks, DNS tunneling, your zero-day exploits, which you can't do much about because nobody knows what they are. Identity threats, so people trying to impersonate people, get access, that sort of thing. So we need to look at the balance between what we're willing to risk against operational procedures. Because it's a catch-22. The more you lock down a system, the less usability you have within that system. So when we look at risk management and the strategies that we have to put in, we have to do a balancing act between what the organisation is willing to weigh up. So when we do this balancing act, we look at multiple areas of the business, and it's not just the risk of something occurring, it's the likelihood of it occurring or reoccurring. Peace of mind within the organisation, in other words, how much is your reputation going to suffer? We need to protect all our resources. That includes data and physical devices. We need to meet all of our requirements for compliance. Now that can be within our policies, industry standards, or it could be, legal requirements. We need to have a system where we review and look at continuous improvement of whatever systems we put in places. So we're looking at improving our overall business operations and prevent losses to the organisation. So first task for you is not to continue listening to this little presentation, is jump across to Corporate Compliance Insights and have a look at the key elements of the risk management processes. And while you're going through that, compile a summary and have a look at that summary as we go through the risk assessment and strategies that we want to put in. So what are we doing? We're going to be looking at how we can mitigate the risk to the organisation. We're going to continue to identify and reassess those risks. And we need to understand the impact that any given event will have on our organisation. So there's a couple of things that we can do with risk. We can try mitigating it, transferring it to another section, avoiding the risk, or accepting the risk. Okay, so as I said, risk management, any cybersecurity or security in principle, is about balancing the frequency of a risk or the likelihood of an event occurring against the impact that that will have. And there's strategies that we can implement to reduce the likelihood of that event occurring or the impact that that event will have on the organisation. And that's what we're looking at now, is that balance. So first thing you need to really do is work out what is required. So to do this, we need to go through a consultation period with all our stakeholders. Now, the stakeholders are the people that are going to be using the system or understand the systems. So we need to answer who the users are, what access they require, what information is critical, how that information is communicated, and what security is already in place to protect that information. Because we need to know where we are so we can put in potentially new policies and procedures. So generally speaking, the ones that are going to be using it or part of the information chain are the ones that will understand what's going on the most. So by communicating and getting them involved in this whole process, you help to communicate the importance of cybersecurity to other members of the team and help promote the culture of adopting a more secure approach. So communication is the key through this process. Now, there's two types of questioning techniques we basically talk about within this, and that's open and closed questions. Now, open questioning is you're trying to get them to tell you a story, whereas a closed question is basically yes or no type of answer in its reply. So your job during this whole process is to be actively listening to what they are saying or replying. Because one of the things that you can fall into is having a preconceived concept of what the answer should be, and you basically only hear what you want to hear rather than what they're saying. So once you've gone through the consultation and have an understanding of what's going on, you need to determine what the scope of risk is to the organisation. So we need to identify the areas of the risk. So is it with remote workers? Is it with a particular function within a department or between departments? Is it a single area within the organisation or multiple areas? Or if you're working collaboratively, is it across multiple organisations themselves? So, factors that will impact this scope is the type of industry you're working in, because banking is vastly different to engineering or a hairdresser down the road. So when we're looking at the risk to the organisation, we need to look at the organisation and what it does as well. It's not a one-stop shop. We really need to tailor our responses to the organisation. So the risk analysis is, when we look at the cyber risk, we're looking at the consequence of the attack and the likelihood of the attack occurring. So our scope is there to identify the critical risks to the organisation, and we need to have a clear definition of what the threats are, where they're coming from, whether they're internal users, people that are peeved with management, outside influences. Now, most people will be shocked when they realise a lot of the risk is internal. So we now have a definition of what areas of the organisation are at risk, what the types of threats are. Now we need to put together a response plan. So we need to develop a suitable solution for the risk. So that could be implementing multi-factor authentication, or as simple as keeping our software up to date. So we come up with our solution for the risk reward scenarios that we've discovered. Now, as a security officer, our job is to implement the organisation's policy. It's not to create it and enforce it. It's up to the management, the stakeholders, to come up with this. So when you're doing the consultation review process, you present your solutions for management to sign off on. Okay, it's very important that upper management are fully on board with any solutions when we come to security procedures. We need their support and full backing. So you present it, it's got to be in a presentable, clearly understandable, well-structured format so that we can gain approval. You've got to remember your target audience. Now, management will not necessarily understand technical jargon from IT. They may have no computer knowledge at all. They're there to approve the concepts and provide you with the resources and funding you need to implement these policies. So what we're looking at right now when you're presenting these for approval is clear and structured solution so that they can understand it without the technical babble. So, strategies for implementation. Once you've got the solution approved, you need to have it documented so that it is easy to implement. And the other reason we need to document these processes so that they're clear and concise is because they're there to support us moving forward, and they provide us with historical information to prove or meet. So error reporting, evaluation, modification, these steps have to be documented. Anything we do when it comes to security needs to be clearly documented, dated, and checked. So, key things to remember. Every solution will vary based on the client requirements. That will vary between industries, the size of the workforce, type of technology they're using, and what the organisation decides is critical to protect. This is where using a structured approach like the Essential 8 comes into play, where we can help identify the security maturity levels of the organisation. It's a very clear and structured approach to implementing cybersecurity within any organisation, building up from nothing. So when we look at strategies, we need to identify the assets that we're protecting, identify the risks. So these are the risks to the assets. Identify what the threats are, whether they've occurred in the past or possibly reoccurring or occurring now, and conducting a risk analysis of that. We then need to plan as if that attack will occur. So we need to be producing a threat assessment, developing our solution, which is part of the incident response plan. So this is what tells us who's responsible for doing what if an event occurs. We need to look at a gradient of security risks, and it's got to be all documented. What we need to also have in the place is procedures for keeping things up to date on a regular basis, such as Microsoft's patches once a month. We need to provide training to staff within the organisation on a regular basis, because staff rotate. They get complacent. We get new staff in. So we need to have a regular education cycle within the organisation. Part of that response plan, we need to clearly identify the roles and responsibilities within the security plan. So this is so that people know who to go to at each stage of the response. And what the correct procedures are when dealing with an event. Our policies and procedures need to provide clear, concise instructions on what's going on. They also need to comply with the regulation and laws. We need to build an active culture to help prevent cybersecurity risk within the organisation. So this is getting people to be aware of what the risks are, what phishing attacks are, all those things. It's education, communication. So we need to have that within the culture. We need to have it within our procedures, and we need people to be actively involved in implementing it, reviewing it, and improving it. So how does this all work out? So we need to have our plans well documented, communicated to everybody. We need to monitor it, and we need to have a register of what's occurring, when, how, and why. And then we have to continually review all those processes and see whether or not those processes, those solutions we put in, are actually meeting our requirements for our security risk that we've agreed on. Why is it important that we address cybersecurity? Well, in Australia, we definitely have privacy laws. Okay? So we need to look at the risk to privacy and confidentiality, data breaches, how to report it, what to do if we detect a breach, who to report it to, and how to protect ourselves. So part of this risk management is to develop a incident response plan. Now, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Computer Security Incident Handling Guide is a good starting point. And guess what your next activity is going to be? You guessed it. Go off and read it. All right. So, none of this is compulsory for an organisation to implement, but it is strongly recommended that we work towards it and continually improve upon what we have in place, because everybody's at risk and everybody needs to take steps in improving it. Now, at this point, you should have a look at assessment task 1, question 1, which is the knowledge questions, which is part of that looking up through the plans, and that is having a look at what laws are applicable to cybersecurity. So what laws apply to what we've covered so far. So there's a little table there for you to reference, have a look through, and sort of answer. Yes, it means we're checking up whether you actually do these little activities on the side. Yeah. So, next part is procedures and frameworks. Now, there's several specific procedures and frameworks that apply to risk management, and risk management can be applied in so many different areas. It's not just cybersecurity, and the steps of risk management are pretty much the same and transferable across everywhere. So when we do a risk analysis of occupational health and safety, cybersecurity, the basic steps and cycles of the framework are pretty much the same. So we need to identify the risk, try to reduce it, transfer it, accept it, avoid it. So this is how we mitigate it, how to reduce the impact on the organisation of that risk. So when we look at a framework, it's going to tell us basically the mechanics of going through and putting together our procedures on how to detect the risk, how to protect us from it, identify the risk, recover the risk, respond to the risk. There's so many tools and frameworks out there. Have a hunt around, find the ones that work for you. So NIST Cyber Framework is just one of them. Go have a hunt through that, do the balance, take notes. It will all be relevant, because one of the things we'll be looking at is the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's Essential 8, which is about identifying the level of security mitigation that you have within your organisation. And there's basically 4 levels of maturity, and that framework is about taking steps within each level, implementing the steps within the level before proceeding to the next. And it's all about mitigation and balancing the risk and reward for the organisation. So when we talk about mitigation strategies, we talk about preventing malware, for example. So application control, patching, configuring our Microsoft Office macro settings, hardening of our web browsers. So all the steps we can take to help protect the organisation. Next one is the extent of cyber security incidents. So we can restrict who's got administrative privileges to systems. So only those that absolutely need admin rights should get them. Keep our systems up to date, and always use multi-factor authentication for those users. And protection, so recovery of our data, so that things can be recovered and operations reinstated as quickly and painlessly as possible. So such things as doing daily backups. Pretty simple and straightforward, but some people don't even do it. Okay, now ISO, which is International Standard Organization, has a few standards that refer to risk management. So there's an international approach to help mitigate and handle risk. And again, kind of goes around the same procedures: identification, analysis, evaluation, treatment, monitor and review, rinse and repeat. So there's a couple of the standards that we should go take some notes on, as they help point out the structure and the approaches that we need to take to reduce the risk to any organisation that we're working for. Okay, and you guessed it, some more reading off with resources and notes. So this one's from the UK on cybersecurity risk assessment. And a reminder that this is the end of the first topic. So you should start having a look at your project portfolio as well, as there's some scenario based things, so you need to start looking at building up things like the questions that you would ask when you're consulting with your stakeholders and things like that. So have a look, don't leave it to the last minute, build on your knowledge, put it in place so that you're not rushing at the end. All right, that's the final slide within topic 1. So thank you for joining me for the introduction into risk management for cybersecurity, and I'll see you in the next one.